Street Fighter should have been one of the easiest video game movies ever made. And I know that sounds insane because the movie we got is such a weird, messy, confusing thing. And that's exactly why it bothers me. Because when you strip it down, the answer was sitting right there. Bloodsport with costumes. Am I right? That should have been Street Fighter. You had Jean Claude Van Damme, you had the Street Fighter game, you had colorful fighters from around the world, you had a villain like M. Bison, you had Ryu, Ken, Chun Li, Cammy, Vega, Guile, Zangief, or Zangief, depending on how you pronounce it. You had the entire arcade fighting game craze sitting there at the perfect time as well. And somehow, with all of that, they made a movie that feels less like Street Fighter and more like a fake military rescue comedy. That's what drives me crazy. Because I'm not coming at this like someone who hates the movie or hates this era. I'm the complete opposite. I'm a big 90s kid. Nostalgia absolutely has its claws in me. I recognize that. I love this stuff. Even the bad movies from that era have a certain flavor to them. They feel alive. They have weird choices, big stars, ridiculous costumes, loud music, and some actual color to them. Sometimes they're terrible, but they're terrible in a way that still feels like somebody made a movie who gave a damn. And fighting stuff in the 90s, man, that was my world. What can I say? Super Nintendo was hot shit back in the day. Mortal Kombat, same thing. Street Fighter, hot shit as well. I mean, this wasn't just a game. This was life. This is what we did after school, during the weekends. We rented the games. I remember playing Street Fighter with my dad and playing Mortal Kombat with my friends. Picking the characters, discussing and arguing about who was the better character and who had the most awesome moves. So, when people talk about Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, for me it's not just the movies or just the games, it's the whole feeling around them. It's that era where fighting games felt massive. It's the 90s. And personally, I leaned more towards Street Fighter. Mortal Kombat had the blood and the darkness and the fatalities. I love that shit too, for real. But Street Fighter had this colorful martial arts world warrior thing to it. Different countries, different styles, different personalities. Yeah, I leaned more towards that. So when they made a Street Fighter movie and put Van Damme in it, come on, man. That is the dream. Van Damme was the guy for this. People can joke all they want about the accent or the terrible line delivery or whatever you want, but I do not care. If you're making a 90s fighting movie, Van Damme is not your problem. Van Damme is the solution. Van Damme is always the correct answer. Van Damme is the reason this movie should work. The man built half his career on kicking people in the face. That's why this movie is so strange to me. It has the right star, for sure. It has the right era and the right game. It even has some of the right tone, but it keeps pointing all of that in the wrong direction. And we all know what it is. It's the military angle. I mean, the military angle is not even the problem on paper, I guess. Guile is a military guy, he's a military person. Bison is a warlord. A soldier going after a dictator makes sense. I can accept that. I can accept the hostages, the bases, the propaganda, soldiers, all of it. That can be the setup, I think. But it should have stayed the setup. The movie should start with that military conflict, then use it as the doorway into the fighting world. Guile gets pulled deeper into Bison's operation, Ryu and Ken get dragged in, Chun Li has her revenge, Cammy's in the field, fighters start crossing paths, styles clash, grudges build. The movie becomes less about the mission and more about these fighters colliding until everything leads to Bison. Instead, the movie keeps treating the mission like the main event, which is weird, and that's also where it loses me. And I think it loses a lot of the people watching it. Because the title is Street Fighter. At some point, the movie needs to feel like fighters are driving the story, not just soldiers, not hostages. You know, it should have moved like a fighting game, and it didn't. That's the painful thing. Bloodsport already showed how simple this can be. You don't need a complicated plot. You need fighters, you need styles, you need tension, and you need personality. You need the feeling that every fight tells you something about the person fighting in it. Now imagine that structure, right? but with Street Fighter characters. That's awesome. That is such an obvious movie that it hurts my brain. It hurts my heart. It really does. I mean, you let the audience meet the fighters through the fights. That's how it should have been. That's how it should have been done, you know. Not through exposition, not through a weird subplot, through action. Ryu and Ken are not just floating around as comic relief hustlers, I guess, you know. Chun Li's revenge is not just one piece of crowded military story. Blanca and Delsim are not trapped in some strange science experiment corner where, you know, they barely feel like they are characters. You know, everything should become or everybody should become part of the fighting world. And that is where Street Fighter 1994 keeps making the wrong choice. It gives you names you recognize, sure, but too often it doesn't give you the feeling behind those names. Blanca for me is the perfect example. If you're going to use Blanca, then use Blanca. Let him be strange, let him be dangerous, and let him actually fight. You know, but the movie turns him into this tragic lab experiment thing. I kind of understand what they're trying to do, but don't. Delsim, same problem. He's there, but he's not really Delsim in the movie, is he? He's not what we want. And I know movies can change things, of course they can. I'm not asking for a character select screen with some dialogue, or, well, I kinda am. But if the character only has the name and not the spirit of the character, then what are we doing here, you know? That's not adaptation, that's just, I don't know, decoration, I guess. And weirdly, the person who understands the assignment best is Raul Julia. His Bison is amazing. Mwah. You know, it's ridiculous, completely ridiculous, and it works so well. He plays him so huge, arrogant, theatrical, vain, and everything you want. You know, I want a lunatic dictator in red who acts like every room becomes, you know, historically important the second he walks into it. That's what I want. And Raul Julia gives you that. You know, hands down, best performance in the movie. He feels like Bison. He feels like that final theatrical boss. The problem is that the movie around him doesn't build the right road to that final boss. You know, in the version they should have been, everything moves toward Bison through fighters, matchups, betrayals, and revenge. And, you know, chaos that escalates. Guile wants him, Chun Li wants him. Basically, everybody wants him, or at least all the other fighters should get pulled into his orbit. But the movie keeps going back to this military plot, and every time it does, it feels like it's walking away from what the movie should be or could have been. That's why I don't fully hate Street Fighter. I can't, I really can't. It has personality, it has color, it has that 90s live action cartoon energy. It has Van Damme, that's already 50% of the movie. It has Kylie Minogue as Cammy. Yeah, no, I like it. You like it, we all like it, and we all know why. So I'm not gonna hate. I'm gonna keep moving on. You know, it has Raul Julia going completely nuclear as Bison. It has moments where the movie almost becomes the thing it should have been, almost, and then it pulls away again. That's the frustrating part. This isn't some dead, empty movie at all. It has an energy for sure. It has some flavor. I mean, I still remember it to this day, so it definitely did something right. It has enough life in it to be entertaining for sure. Street Fighter had all the ingredients. It had Van Damme at the right time, it had a massive game at the right time, you know, it had characters kids already cared about, it had a built-in fighting structure, it had a villain who could be huge and theatrical, it had the perfect era for this kind of dumb, colorful action movie. And, you know, it just made the wrong thing important. That's so weird. Street Fighter didn't need to be more complex, it needed to be more obvious. It needed to trust the thing people already liked. The game was not about military briefings or hostage negotiations. You know, it was about fighters. That's the fantasy, that's what it was. You pick a fighter, you learn the style, you beat the shit out of somebody else, you move up, and then you face the final boss. And that should have been the movie. Bloodsport with costumes. I'll say it again. That's what it should have been. I'm serious, you know. That is genuinely, you know, the thing that Street Fighter should have been. Not darker or more serious or more realistic, just more simple. More fights, better matchups, more character, you know, development through action, more of that arcade energy where every new person walks in, or every person that walks in feels like they could, kick your head off in a completely different way. That's what this movie misses. And still, I can't pretend it has nothing because it does. That's why people still talk about it. That's why I'll still talk about it. That's why it still has all that nostalgia. That's why I can watch parts of it or maybe the whole movie and still smile and think, what the hell were we doing back then? It's wrong, but it's alive. But being alive doesn't mean it worked. That's the tragedy of this movie. They had the era, they had the game, the star, the villain, they had everything. And somehow Street Fighter still forgot the street fighting.